Final Fantasy was born on December 18th, 1987, and since then it has been defining and redefining itself as one of the most indispensable franchises in video games. Through 15 mainline entries and over 90 spin-off games, the child of Hironobu Sakaguchi has gone through a myriad of changes, but still carries a sometimes palpable feeling that separates it from just about everything else in just about every other medium. My name is Drew Kreisman. I'm one half of the Final Fantasy Weekly podcast, and these are my picks for the top 10 attributes that define Final Fantasy. Quick note, I'm talking about concepts here that each game needs, and not the most iconic symbols like chocobos and moogles, who will get their own list later on. Number 10. Beautiful art and graphics. As annoying as arguments over frame rates, fidelity, and teraflops can be, it is nonetheless true that looking great has always been a part of the Final Fantasy identity. Even in the early days, they pushed the boundaries of the 8 and 16-bit Nintendo systems before Final Fantasy VII officially made being a blockbuster an important strand of the franchise's DNA. Final Fantasy games must be visually stunning in ways that not only push the technology forward, but also in ways that astound audiences with brilliant artistry the likes of which they've never seen before. Number 9. A vast and interesting world to explore. Oh, the places you'll go. Visiting a Final Fantasy world can feel like traveling to another planet, but it can also feel like going home. That's because the worlds are so fully realized with fascinating people, histories, and lore that we can dive into for hours. Or, years. Exploring an unknown landscape that could contain any number of surprising secrets and that tend to grow increasingly creative makes every Final Fantasy journey unique. Number 8. Innovative gameplay. It can be easy to forget that these epic quests are actually video games as well. And while there are other franchises known much more for mechanical innovation like Mario or Zelda, Final Fantasy has done its fair share of contributing to the gaming lexicon. From active time battles and job class systems to the invention of the sphere grid in Final Fantasy X, which can be seen in every story-driven game today in the form of skill trees, this series has never rested on its laurels when it comes to gameplay. Even when they step outside their first genre to make tactical games or MMORPGs, or when they take perceived missteps like with 13 or 15, they take risks and change things up, which often leads to a later reward. Which reminds me, Final Fantasy VII Remake is the greatest battle system of all time. Moving on. Number 7. Dramatic twists. Imagine you were watching or reading J.R.R. Tolkien's masterpiece epic, and in the third book, suddenly the heroes went to the moon. It would probably feel out of place in just about any other multiverse, but in Final Fantasy, things like that are expected. Typically late into the story, going all the way back to the very first game, things will turn out to be other than they appeared. Very quickly, you can go from a high school anime dramedy to space horror. Or your eco-terrorists versus the giant corporation story is now a kaiju movie, thank you very much. That person or idea that you've known this whole time isn't who or what you thought they were, and now we have to re-examine everything. This moment is a vital part of every Final Fantasy experience. Number 6. Being a melting pot. Since its inception, Final Fantasy has always been about melding together ideologies from around the world. Everything from the art style to the music to the settings and themes are imbued with the trademarks of countless cultures. Reimaginings of Hindu, Norse, Greek, Celtic, or Egyptian gods, to name a few, can be found comfortably next to English, French, and German-style castles, which, of course, may house a robot or a spaceship. Whether you're exploring vast metropolises or humble medieval villages, you should expect equal parts fantasy, science fiction, and anime, along with philosophies that stretch beyond the largely made-up Eastern and Western dichotomy. Number 5. Challenging themes. In addition to reaching across the globe to mine concepts, Final Fantasy regularly focuses on themes that challenge the player to think deeply about the world around them. They can be as simple as love conquering hate in the end and finding family in those who accept you for who you are. Or they can be as complex as pontifications about the nature of free will and self-determinism. Final Fantasy is known to ponder about the balance of nature and industry and the yin-yang nature of light and dark, like its forebears, Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. The franchise has never shied away from poking at politics and making parallels to modern social issues like class war and racism. It has even been known to critique certain forms of religious dogma and take strong, non-negotiable stances against cynicism, nihilism, and fascism. Final Fantasy has never been just an escape. It has always been a comment on humanity. Number 4, lovable characters. When you ask most fans of the series what they love most about their favorite entry, a common answer is typically to name a character or two from that game. Final Fantasy characters aren't just well-written and conceived plot devices. They often feel like real friends by the end of the story. We care about them. We root for them to win in the end. We shed real-life tears over their fates. They can often feel like mirrors of ourselves. Terra resonates with anyone who has felt caught between two worlds, two identities. Cloud resonates with anyone who has ever deceived themselves. Yuna resonates with anyone who has dealt with loss and felt the enormous weight of impossible decisions. The series could and should absolutely do an even better job of being inclusive and diverse, but Final Fantasy tends to be ahead of the curve in that regard as well, offering a lot of perspectives missing or ignored altogether in other art. They may all have ridiculously amazing hair, comically proportioned weapons, the ability to defy gravity, and sometimes even wield the power of the gods. Not to mention, they pretty much all are absolutely gorgeous beyond belief, but somehow, through all of that, Final Fantasy heroes feel like a family that we've always known.
When your father showed us how to make a whistle of a blade of grass.
Number 3, great music. It's hard to explain to anyone who isn't familiar with the work of Nobuo Uematsu and his protégés just how phenomenal the music in this series is. Concerts are performed worldwide. Millions of albums have shipped. From the old chip tunes to full orchestras to metal bands and every genre you can think of rearranged by countless fans all over the internet, the celebration of the music of Final Fantasy is universal. And it's not just that there are standout greats like One Winged Angel or pop smash hits like Eyes on Me, which topped the charts in Japan. It's that every single place, every person, every moment comes with a piece of music that is worth listening to over and over and over again. There's no such thing as bad Final Fantasy music. There are literally thousands of original and arranged songs that would take a person, again, literal days to listen to without repeating a single track. And those would be days well spent. Number 2, great stories. What makes a great story? It can be highly subjective, and you could point to things we've already discussed here, like excellent themes and quality character development, but as we all know, Final Fantasy has that X factor. Every game needs to balance all the traditional elements of good storytelling, while also blending in some unique ones and giving us that trademark Final Fantasy feel. The beginning, whether snail or lightning paced, draws you in and captivates your attention. The middle develops and explores all the interesting concepts presented in the beginning, and then comes the end. Final Fantasy knows how to end a story. Whether they are giving you a fully satisfying conclusion that wraps everything in a nice bow, or they leave you with your jaw on the floor wondering what the hell just happened, Final Fantasy stories aren't just good, and they aren't just entertaining. They make an impact. And number 1, evolution. Ever since Final Fantasy II wasn't a direct sequel to the original, It has been established that Final Fantasy is an anthology that places forward-thinking and tradition-smashing at the very forefront. As important as any of the elements discussed on this list may be, above all of them comes the need for this franchise to constantly redefine itself. Unlike most of the rest of the industry that relies on comfort zones and recognizable mascots or main characters for nearly every single entry, Final Fantasy has set itself apart by evolving through a myriad of genres, styles, multimedia content, sequels, prequels, and even redefining the word remake. With Final Fantasy, even when you are looking to the past, you are always moving toward the future. Thank you for watching and listening. Thanks to Chris DeNuno for editing and to Twinstrumental, Your Noble Truths, and Avernicus for the music. And of course, thank you to all of our Patreon subscribers. Let me know what I missed in the comments. For more Final Fantasy content, check out patreon.com/ffweekly, and for more nerdy content of all varieties, check out patreon.com/dcproductions.